Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show. Today is Thursday, February 18th, 2016. Today we don't have Dwayne Patterson with us. He's undergoing some medical care today, and so we're keeping him in prayer, but hopefully he'll be well enough to return next week. Joining me instead from the front lines of the Republican primary in South Carolina, or at least thereabouts, Salena Zito from the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review, triblive.com, and she's on Twitter at Salena Zito Trib, and all the links are in the show post. Welcome to the show. Great to have you back.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, Salena, I understand that you had an opportunity to pose a question to the Donald this week in South Carolina.
Yes. He held a press conference in the town of Hanahan. I have to interrupt you. I'm hearing nothing but feedback.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm trying to eliminate that somewhat. So let's see if we can't make that better. How's that? Any better?
Yeah, it's all gone. I mean, nothing's worse than two Salenas. Oh my goodness.
No. Two Salenas are better than one. Come on.
So, he had a press conference in the small little town of Hanahan, which is outside of Charleston, and it was, covered all by the national press. And if you remember it at all, it happened on Monday, and it was all about Cruz and liars and lawsuits and Bush, and it was a pretty rambunctious press conference, and the place was filled with mostly national press and me, and I kind of didn't have any interest at all in all that stuff. I sort of wanted to know why he was holding it in this town. It made absolutely no sense to me. Now, I don't know South Carolina all that well. I mean, I know it pretty well, but I don't know all the intricacies. So that was the first thing I wanted to know. And he said, well, it's where they're going to put the Guantanamo Bay prisoners. There's an old Navy brig in this town of Hanahan. And so he answered that. And then my follow-up question was, what's your closing arguments for the people of the state? Like, why should they vote for you? And he went off on a litany of answers, and he was actually quite civil. And then again, I wasn't trying to stoke the fire. I actually wanted to know why the heck he was there.
So you were actually quite civil, and he was civil in return, which is kind of nice. Sometimes that doesn't happen.
Well, I think he was happy to not be. I mean, he said that. He goes, "That's a good question. I'm glad somebody finally asked it." And he probably wasn't happy, but he said that anyways. But it was good to find out what brought him to this town. To me, that was the biggest mystery. Not about how much he sort of hates Cruz and Bush. I wanted to know what was the draw of that town.
So, I mean, you've been on the ground in South Carolina. How's Trump doing? I mean, obviously the polls are showing him with strong leads in South Carolina. I mean, he seems to be doing extremely well. What are you hearing on the ground?
Well, based on I was reporting on both contests. So the one on Saturday is the Republicans, and next Saturday is the Democrats. And sort of what I've found is, and this is interviews with people. I didn't go to rallies so that I would find people to just tell me why they're so happy at the rally that they were going to. But I think that Trump has probably not only hit a ceiling in that state, but he's probably also losing voters in that state. Like New Hampshire, South Carolinians are very much known not only for the rough and tumble politics, but for also deciding at the last moment. And the second place person that they would consider is as important as their first choice, because they are in all likelihood, or at least 50% of the time, go with their second choice. So I found surprisingly, a lot of residual support still for Ben Carson. He has a lot of respect earned by the voters in South Carolina. I saw an ascendance of John Kasich, not in that he would win it, but that the likelihood that he would pass Bush is there. And then I definitely see Rubio growing.
So Mark momentum is real then. Mark momentum is a real thing.
It's very real. It's incredibly real. And I think that it comes in twofold. Not only did he own his mistake, but he has also come out on the trail very relaxed, very happy, joking, but also very passionate and detailed about his positions on different issues. And he's connected with the voters. One of the things that Cruz is doing that is working with a particular type of voter, but is also turning off other voters, is that he is not connecting in the way that Rubio is. He is more preaching to the voters. And while that is appealing to some voters, that is not, people still want you to pass the beer test, right?
Right.
They still want you to be likable. So Rubio, Kasich, and Carson all passed the beer test with South Carolinians. I'm not Cruz and not Trump. So I would say there's probably some collapsing in their votes, and I would look at South Carolina the way you looked at Iowa. The polls aren't telling you everything there is to know.
That's interesting. And do you think he's going to, I don't want to necessarily ask you to predict, but I am going to ask you to predict. So there you go.
He's going to do very well.
You think so?
Rubio's going to do very well in South Carolina.
Strong second,
for sure.
Think?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
For sure. He, Nikki Haley doesn't just, people are saying, well, she supported Mitt Romney in 2012. Well, she supported Mitt Romney in 2012 when it was in Iowa. She held off for a reason until the last moment. She didn't just, sort of make this idly. I'm sure there was polling data that none of us see in front of us that she looked at that helped her with her sort of comparative looks at all the candidates. And she's a very, very popular governor. She's a very smart politician. She has a huge future in the Republican Party. And nothing has been sort of more remarkable for Republicans in South Carolina to see Rubio, Haley, and Tim Scott on a stage. I mean, it's just this whole new generational thing of the Republican Party that has really struck a nerve with South Carolinians.
So, Ted Cruz today, I think the Cruz campaign actually had a pretty clever framing of this, because I think they were hoping to get Nikki Haley's endorsement. Obviously, they wanted to get Trey Gowdy's. They didn't get that. Tim Scott went for Marco Rubio as well. So the Cruz campaign is going around saying today, Salena, well, if Rubio can't win South Carolina with Nikki Haley, Trey Gowdy, and Tim Scott on a stage with him, then he really doesn't have a chance to win any place else. Now, I think that may be setting the bar a little high, but I think it's certainly a point worth considering. This is a guy who's kind of all the stars are lining up for him in South Carolina. South Carolina is an important state. And if he can't win, if Trump ends up beating him, you have to kind of ask yourself, where exactly does Rubio fit in? Or Ted Cruz for that matter. But I think to me, a strong second in South Carolina means you keep going, even if you're Marco Rubio with all those endorsements. But is there an expectation that he should do really well in South Carolina with all these people lining up behind him?
Well, certainly Cruz is trying to frame it that way, right?
Right, exactly, yes.
He's trying to make it, he's the one that's setting the bar, because then he can turn around and say, wow, look where Rubio ended up. And don't underestimate Cruz. I talked to 10, 20 different voters who said they've received at least 4 to 6 voter contacts from Cruz. He has a ridiculous ground game.
And he had it in Iowa, too, and that's the reason why he won there. It
is. But while, if you hear all the national media saying, well, South Carolina is known for its rough and tumble politics. It is. but they do not like personal. You can be rough and tumble on different issues, but don't make it personal. And that has hurt both Cruz and Trump.
Let's talk about Jeb Bush, because this is a guy who desperately needs to have a good day someplace. There was a rumor going around that the money had run out and that the pay was going to end by Saturday. That rumor apparently was denied. I don't know how true it is, but the rumor was denied anyway. I didn't dig too much into that because, quite frankly, I'm never really terribly trusting of those types of revelations. They're interesting when they pop up, but I always think, yeah, right, okay. When the campaign tells me that they're cutting back staff, then I'll believe that. What is the status of Jeb Bush's campaign, and are you seeing any traction at all for Jeb Bush in South Carolina?
I'm seeing no traction at all for Jeb Bush. I went to the George W. Bush event and in South Carolina, and I almost felt like it was a wake that his brother put on for him.
Yeah.
Like this is the end. It was really sad. The vibe was sad. It was just really sad. And George did not look excited to be doing it. He was a bit rusty, although he's still George, so he still has that saying, right, where he can get people motivated. But this is a man who put politics behind him. He made that decision when he left in 2009 that he's done. He did it. He achieved the highest office you can achieve in this country. He had some good successes, some mistakes, and he kept the country safe. And I feel like he feels as though he gave as much as he could give to this country, and he didn't want to do politics again.
Yeah, and who blames him? I mean,
I wouldn't want that job.
No, neither would I. And, I don't think anybody would really blame Barack Obama if he said the same thing, although very clearly he's telling people he wants to remain involved in politics, activist politics, I would imagine, but or maybe sort of like Jimmy Carter-esque type of politics, which
right.
brings up a whole
I
other
see him
thing.
And that sort of thing. Yeah.
Right, yeah, but yeah, most presidents like to retire. Reagan retired. And of course, Reagan got ill not too long after that, but Reagan retired. He said, I've had enough, leave it to the next guy. So you can understand why people would do that, but it's sort of the obligatory, almost a Hail Mary-esque sort of thing to bring George W. Bush out there to try to revive Jeb. And, look, I've interviewed Jeb. He was a fine governor in Florida.
Absolutely.
Terrific record in Florida. But this is not 1988. It's not 1999, 2000. People have done the Bush thing a couple of times, and it's clearly people are not interested in dynastic politics on the Republican side any longer.
No,
if
they're
they
not.
ever were.
They're absolutely not. And it's sort of, I think both parties are experiencing that.
Yes.
I would suggest that what I found in South Carolina is incredibly counter to what the polling is showing on the Democratic side. I went out to the poorest, blackest counties and talked to people that were over 50 because that, according to the Clinton campaign, is the heart and soul of who's going to vote for them next Saturday. And if you go to my blog, you will see that I couldn't find those Hillary supporters. They were supporting Bernie.
I kind of wondered about this because South Carolina, I don't necessarily think that South Carolina is going to be Hillary country. It doesn't seem like it. It doesn't
seem like it. It doesn't feel like it. We drove all over the state. We focused a lot on the black counties where the majority of the results will come from. And not only, I know this is only anecdotal, but I found it stunning. It was 1,500 miles. I saw one Hillary sign. One. That seemed astounding to me.
Yeah. It's like they're not really there on the ground, right?
Well, and she had this, I had heard that she was going to have this big speech on race. And while I was trying to avoid going to candidate events. I was like, oh, I'll see where it is while I'm down here. Well, it wasn't down there. It was in Harlem.
In New York, right?
To me, it was telling me, and she was like, it was sort of this campaign telegraphing to me that, yes, I could have urban black support. But South Carolina, I'm not going to really hold an event down here because I don't know who's going to show up, if there's going to be protesters, if there's not going to be a big crowd. If I can just sort of keep this storyline going, the polls show that I'm way ahead, maybe I can, keep the mirage going, right? And people will believe that's what's going to happen, and people will show up to vote because they think that's what they're supposed to do. But in interview after interview, black voters told me that they are really tired of being told who to vote for. And they're really tired of the media assumption that they're going to vote for Hillary. I found a lot of voters for Bernie. I found a lot of black voters that were going to vote Republican.
Is that because Republicans are making an effort to get on the ground and talk to those people, or are they just tired?
They're just tired. I mean, there's a lot of poverty in these areas, like 30%. In these, there's 12 counties that are predominantly black. In these counties, 30% of the population lives below the poverty line. That's astounding to me.
Well, are they Trump voters?
They kept those votes. Then, interestingly enough, they kept who they were voting to themselves, the ones that were not voting Democrat.
Because my theory on this is that Trump is really, and I think you know this better than anybody, that there is a large number of disaffected voters who are very angry about the fact that the ideological wars have mostly left them behind, have left their wages stagnant, have done seemingly unending, are sinking everybody into debt, including the nation as a whole. And I think that they're pretty ripe for a populist who can stir them up and make them believe that he or she is somebody who can basically tear down the old institutions and create ones that fix the problems. Now, whether or not Trump actually does that, I still think he's the guy who's best positioned to make that argument. And I would not be surprised if he was gaining traction among those disaffected voters in there, including black Carolinians. Excuse me.
Oh yeah, there were a lot of black supporters for Trump at his different events. But when I went out and took people inside their own element, if they were black and they were supporting Trump, they didn't say it. They kept that to themselves.
Yep. So, I mean, I think, and the other part of this too, Salena, is that there's another week to go longer for the Democrats in South Carolina than there are for Republicans. I mean, we're coming to the end now where we're going to start seeing the final polling. Probably tomorrow, we're going to start seeing the final polling. So all the speculation as to whether or not the Saturday night debate impacted Trump's numbers or whether Marco Mentum is a real thing, all that kind of stuff. We're going to start seeing the final polling show up in South Carolina for the Republicans. But all of these story arcs are going to continue for another week for the Democrats. Meanwhile, they've got a caucus on, is it Tuesday night? Or is it on Saturday in Nevada?
Oh, the Democrats have a caucus on Saturday.
And
I firmly believe that that's going to have an impact on what happens in South Carolina.
And that is, by all accounts, more or less a dead heat. And I would guess
he's closed the gap by 20 percentage points over her in less than a month.
Yeah.
That is absolutely astounding.
And she's not campaigning there. She is not campaigning. She's campaigning in New York, same as she's doing in South Carolina. I think Bernie goes in there, and I think he's got, the college-age ground troops to drive a caucus turnout there, and I think it's going to be something ugly for the Clintons because they've been trying to downplay Nevada now for a couple of weeks, ever since New Hampshire. They've been trying to downplay the Nevada caucus, and I don't know how well that's going to actually work for them.
Right. Yeah, the problem is that they think it's 1992 or 1996, and you can sort of hide things from people.
Yeah.
There's nowhere to, everything is transparent. You can't hide anything anywhere. And, including, most importantly, is voter sentiment. And, I'll be the first to say that in 2011 and 12, when what was that movement where they all went in tents and
Occupy.
Yeah, I dismissed it as something that was sort of made up, and I think that was partly true. But I also think that we are seeing the residuals of that with this Bernie support.
Absolutely. Oh, I think they're linked. And you know what the interesting thing about that is that that's a movement that Obama and Organizing for America really tried to fuel. And if people remember this, the Occupy movement started in September 2011, about the same time that Obama was talking about Mitt Romney being, he didn't use the term vulture capitalist. I think Newt Gingrich was the first one that used that term, but basically talking about Mitt Romney in those terms because he was pretty sure that Mitt Romney was going to be his general election opponent. And all of a sudden at the same time, these Occupy movements start springing up. And I mean, it was basically a signal from the White House that it's time to rise up and do this sort of thing for the election. And this is why I think you have the same problem on the left as you do on the right now, is that whether or not it was intentional, I'm pretty sure it was intentional, but whether or not it certainly was perceived by the Occupy troops and by the people who were supporting them, the intellectual support that they were getting from people like Elizabeth Warren, that the Obama administration, I speak for a living, the Obama administration, the Obama administration was going to take up their cause in the second term. All you got to do is push me across the finish line one more time, and we'll have more flexibility after the election, and we're going to really push the progressive agenda. And then afterwards, after the election was over, they basically got more of the same thing that happened to the first, only with less accomplishment, because Obama couldn't work with the Republican Congress. So all he did was basically pay lip service to the progressive agenda and say, woe is me. You didn't give me a Congress that will work with me, so nothing's going to happen. And I think those people and those people are looking at Bernie Sanders rather than Hillary Clinton because they're tired of getting promises that don't get kept. That they're tired of having politicians have them march out in the street and then don't deliver for them. And they see Bernie Sanders as a guy who can do that, even though, let's face it, Bernie Sanders is not a guy who's delivered much of anything for anyone. But he's the guy, he's the alternative.
Perception is different than reality in politics, right?
Right.
So I went to a Baptist church on Sunday, 3-hour service. It was amazing. Everybody should do that once in their life, right?
I've done it once, yeah.
And afterwards, I spoke to the pastor, but I also spoke to a couple women afterwards. And this young woman, her name was Ashley Green. She said, I'm really tired of everybody using us. I'm really tired of everybody coming here every 4 years, promising everything. She goes, look, I'm black, I'm single, I'm female. I'm the vote that everybody wants. And yet the one person that the Democrats never do anything for. And it was just sort of a very fascinating insight and personal insight into how voters feel and about how they've been treated. Mm-hmm. And I think you find the same sort of sentiments on both sides. So you see Republican voters who say, look, I gave you guys the keys of the House in 2010. I gave you the keys of the House and the Senate in 2014. You still haven't given me anything.
Right.
And I'm tired of you coming for my vote and not giving me anything.
Right. And that's what's driving this. That's what's driving
across the board.
Across the board, both parties. And the only difference is that Hillary Clinton may have had enough money up front to hold off Bernie Sanders. We'll see. But it's not looking very good for Hillary Clinton right now. And I'd argue that Bernie Sanders is gaining strength, not losing it in the primary process. He's making himself a very credible alternative. And when you have the Democratic Party, whose credible alternative to the person who's been around for a quarter century in Washington is the guy who's the socialist from Vermont, that to me, I mean, the self-described, self-declared socialist, that to me says that there's a real big problem in the Democratic Party. So, but to get back to your recollection about the person who said, the Democratic Party has left me behind. They aren't basically they're not engaging. I mean, that's the same thing I found in my book. I was talking to people who were saying, look, the Republican Party doesn't even bother to engage with the African American community anymore. They won't even show up. And so the Democratic Party can take us for granted, and they never show up because they don't have to. They just assume that we're going to vote for them. And it's just not healthy. That's the reason why you have to have both parties competing for these constituencies. It's not healthy.
No, it absolutely isn't healthy. And, if people are shocked, and I mean, we've been talking about this for years, and I've been warning about it for twice as many years, that this was coming, and it was going to be big, and it was going to be loud, and it was going to be completely disruptive. And the thing is, Ed, is when this election is over, no matter who the nominees are, whether it's Trump and Sanders, or Trump and Hillary, or Marco and Hillary, whatever the eventual nominees are, people are still not going to be happy.
No.
In a very big way, and this disruptive force is going to continue. And I do believe that eventually it leads to a new party. This is not something that happens overnight. If you look at the history of the Republican Party, the seeds of it were during the Missouri Compromise in 1820. But it took 36 years before they took a bunch of fractured different parts of the party, and they formed the Republican Party in 1856.
Essentially, kind of similar to what
we are going through the same sort of economic dislodgement and dissatisfaction with the status quo that they went through in those 36 years.
All right, so I know we got to let you go here, Salena, but quickly, what can we expect to see Saturday night in South Carolina?
It's going to be some variation of Trump, Rubio, Cruz. I think as long as Rubio appears in third place and above, it's a victory for him. If it's tight for Trump, this could take the wind out of his sails. And Cruz to me, is more of the unknown than Rubio, because you can feel Rubio ascending. It's unclear what's happening with Cruz because there's sort of so much noise.
Right. And
there is a strong possibility that Bush could finish last. You also
really?
felt there's a lot of great sentiment for Ben Carson. I would not underestimate him in this state. And there was a lot of support for Kasich. It's almost as if he was taking the votes away from Bush, even though he's not there. He does have a really, really great ad, and he does have a lot of soldiers in the field.
After South Carolina, let's assume that Trump, Rubio, and Cruz finish very strong and everybody else is way behind. Do Carson, Bush, and Kasich drop out at that point?
I would say the one that has to drop out is Bush.
Yeah.
I would if Carson is above Kasich, I would say he should stay in. If Kasich and Carson are close, I should say both should stay in. Kasich has great appeal in Rust Belt and Midwest states, he still contributes something to the dialogue. I don't think his time is over yet.
Interesting. All right. Well, we're going to keep an eye on that, Salena. And of course, we're going to keep an eye on everything that you're doing at triblive.com. And you can, if you really want to keep an eye on what Salena is doing, without, being like kind of stalkerish, because that wouldn't be cool. You go to Twitter. She's at Salena Zito Trib on Twitter. And she's great, and she's a good friend, and I want to thank you for joining me today, Salena, because we really do appreciate the update from South Carolina.
Oh, are you kidding me? I loved being on. I'll be in Virginia covering the SEC primary. It should be really fascinating. Feel free to give me a call.
Excellent. We will do that. Salena Zito, Pittsburgh Tribune Review. Thanks again for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Joining us now is John Allen from Crux, the Boston Globe's fabulous Catholic news imprint, I guess you could call it. Cruxnow.com is where you can find him. And John, you're currently in the U.S., is that right?
Yes, I am making my way back from El Paso, where I was covering the Pope's border stop on the U.S. side.
And you actually have been somewhat prophetic. I know that we're all priests, prophets, and kings in this in our religion, John. But you turned out to be more prophetic than most of us. You were writing about Donald Trump's very bad Catholic day yesterday, not today.
Yeah, that's right. Yesterday, Trump, of course, was under fire from Ted Cruz for being too soft on abortion, and at the same time, he was under fire from the Vatican for being too hard on immigration. My point was that being seen as either soft on abortion or hard on immigrants is bad for you in Catholic terms. Being seen as both at once, that's kind of the Catholic Chernobyl. Now, obviously I overstated, because the real Catholic Chernobyl is being taken to task by the Pope himself, which happened to Trump on the plane on the way back to Rome.
Yeah, there's actually a couple of very interesting passages in this press conference that Pope Francis had on the plane back to Rome. Well, definitely want to start with this. Now, he didn't call out Trump by name, but the reporter who asked the question did. And Pope Francis said, for somebody to call for building walls without building bridges is not Christian. That person can't call himself a Christian. Donald Trump responded to this in the manner in which you'd expect Donald Trump to respond to this, which was to be very offended that somebody was criticizing him and questioning his faith. I actually read through the entire quote. You guys have it at Crux, of course, and I read through the entire quote. Pope Francis does allow that maybe this is not what he's saying. Maybe this is all I'm hearing, but if all he's doing, he's kind of the if all he's doing is this, then he really can't call himself a Christian. But I give him the benefit of the doubt. Now, that sounds like it still sounds like a pretty harsh rebuke, doesn't it, John?
Yes. Now, if you read through the entire transcript of what the Pope said, it is, I think, the first thing that is abundantly clear. He really doesn't know who Donald Trump is. Because, he says, now, listen, if this is what the man is saying, all that has to be verified. I'm assuming that you're putting this correctly. He was speaking to Phil Puella from Reuters, who is the journalist who asked the question,
right.
Indicating that the Pope really doesn't know that much about Donald Trump. But his point was that anyone who is advocating walls as the solution to the phenomenon of immigration is not in keeping with the Christian gospel. Now, to be clear, that's not really an original papal idea.
No.
Popes have been saying that for the better part of 50 years. The only thing new here, of course, is saying it in the context of a specific presidential candidate.
Well, and to be honest, I mean, you can make that claim against several different presidential candidates because a number of the ones on the Republican side have talked about building a wall. And at the same time,
and in fact, even today, Ed, Marco Rubio has sort of come to Donald Trump's defense. I mean, what Rubio said in his own statement was that he was not going to comment specifically on the Pope's words, but he said that just like the Vatican does, the United States has the right to regulate who enters its territory. So you're right. It's not just Trump saying this. I think what makes this unique is that Trump is the one who went on the Fox Business Channel prior to the Pope's trip and accused the Pope of being manipulated by the Mexicans to advance their own economic and political interests and suggested he didn't understand American realities. So, in a sense, Trump has no one to blame for this but himself.
Right. And, clearly this is a response, at least in some direction, to Trump's statements. And of course, the question was framed as Donald, with Donald Trump in mind. And I have to tell you, I was actually elsewhere because for odd reasons, I had to be out of the house today, and I was following this on my laptop. And one of Donald Trump's campaign, it's either one of the surrogates or one of the campaign officials, tweets out about the Vatican being 100% surrounded by a wall and shows a aerial view of the Vatican with what is supposed to be a wall traced all the way around it. Now, John, I've been to the Vatican. I may be wrong about this. Maybe something's changed since the last time I was there about a year ago. But is there a wall around St. Peter's Square? Because I was a little mystified.
Well, no, there isn't.
No.
There is simply a small sort of, hip-level metal barrier that separates St. Peter's Square from what is considered Italian territory.
Yep.
Well, I mean, it's true that the Vatican is mostly surrounded by walls.
Mostly.
What I was struck by when I heard that comment, and I saw it as you did on my laptop, it is the exact same argument that Italy's far-right Northern League, which is known for being the kind of xenophobic, ultra-nationalist political movement in Italy, it's the same argument they make whenever the Vatican says something in defense of migrants and refugees in Europe. And what this reminds me of was the Vatican's original response to Donald Trump. Because remember, the Pope's comments on the plane were the second time the Vatican had responded to Trump. The first came in Mexico City on the night before the Pope came to the border, when the Vatican spokesperson, Father Federico Lombardi, called Trump's comments saying the Pope was very political and didn't understand American realities. He called that very strange, saying the Pope speaks everywhere in defense of migrants and refugees, not just in the United States. And said that he always makes these comments to European leaders, and said that if Trump ever came to Europe, he might understand that. And in that sense, it is just striking how the rhetoric today is eerily reminiscent of the rhetoric one often hears in Europe whenever similar arguments emerge.
And certainly that's been a big issue in Europe as the migrant crisis has been unfolding there. So I'm sure you're hearing a lot more of that when you're in Europe and you're covering the goings on.
Sure.
There.
I mean, Europe is of course in the middle of its worst refugee crisis since the Second World War. I mean, the estimates are from the UN that more than 1 million refugees have arrived in Europe in 2015. Most of them from Syria, being driven by the violence there. And that is an everyday issue. When the Pope gave his address to diplomats on the 11th of January, which is his most important foreign policy speech every year, he indicated that the defense of migrants and refugees, particularly in Europe, but in other parts of the world as well, would be a top priority for him in 2016. So in that sense, there is absolutely nothing surprising that this would have been one of the front burner issues on his trip to Mexico, and of course, in particular, his stop at the U.S.-Mexico border.
Now, you've written a book about the global war on Christians. I mean, that's the name of the book, The Global War on Christians. And it's an excellent book. Anybody who hasn't read it yet should definitely be reading it. John lays it out very well, and it's not all in one area, but of course, a good deal of it is in the area where these refugees are fleeing from. So some of these people who are fleeing are probably Christians, because the Christian communities have been emptied out over there. Some of them may not be.
Disproportionately, the refugees arriving in Europe today from Syria, now, of course, Christians are only 10% of the Syrian population.
Right, yes.
But they are significantly more than 10% of the Syrian refugees arriving in Europe today, because they are the community in particular that is most at risk.
And so, I mean, this is, there's all sorts of different layers that go into this refugee crisis, and it's much, much different for Europe than it is here in the U.S., where it's primarily an economic issue for people in the U.S.
Well, although, I mean, I have to say, I spent a good bit of time on the border this week, and one of the things that people such as Bishop Mark Seitz, who's the Bishop of El Paso in Texas, one of the things he will tell you is that the immigrants they are seeing coming across the border today aren't primarily moving across in search of economic opportunity. They're fleeing violence, particularly from the Northern Triangle region of Central America. We're talking about the place where Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador intersect, which is a region that is basically lawless, where there is no state, that is under the control of extraordinarily violent drug gangs, and where young girls are being forced into sexual violence, where young boys are being forced into the gangs, where parents who dare stand up to them are being slaughtered, left, right, and center. And that's what people who are coming here today flee. Seitz would make the argument, actually, that many of the so-called illegal immigrants that we see in the United States today aren't actually illegal, because under both international and American law, they would qualify for refugee status if they could ever get their day in court.
And that's part of, I mean, it's actually somewhat similar, at least, in terms of the situation in Syria and Libya would be the other place where a lot of these refugees have been coming from as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Basically, the collapse of a state, in this case, more than one. In both cases, both hemispheres, more than one state, which displaces many, many, many people. And so, yeah, I see where the bishop is going with that. So bad day for Donald Trump. Before we move off of that to the other subject I want to ask you about, how long do you think that this is going to get prolonged? Because, Donald Trump isn't known for letting go of grudges quickly. Ask Megyn Kelly about that.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's true. I mean, Donald Trump does not suffer criticism, with an equanimous spirit. But on the other hand, the good thing about Donald Trump is that he's being attacked virtually every day. So tomorrow there will no doubt, be some new fusillade from the Cruz campaign or from the media or something that Trump is off to. So, I'm not really not sure. And the other thing I would say is that at least in the short term, I'm not sure this actually hurts Trump. I mean,
don't think it does either.
In terms of the Republican base, his strong anti-immigrant stand plays pretty well. I mean, it may be more of a vulnerability if he ever gets into a general election, but right now this may not be bad news. Frankly, Ed, I think the more interesting thing in that regard from the press conference was the Pope's suggestion that he might be open to approving the use of birth control to fight the Zika virus, because unlike the 2016 elections in America, that's something he actually can control.
That was the next subject I was going to bring up, John, because you are very adept at this. You knew exactly where I was going with that. You must be the master of segue, because this is exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. Now, oftentimes, when Catholics hear media reports that Pope Francis said this, Pope Francis said that, we usually have to go back to the source documents or to Crux, because you guys do a really good job in covering Pope Francis, to find out what actually Pope Francis actually said, rather than what a lot of the media comprehension of it was. In this case, though, it's actually, he didn't flat out state this, but he kind of sidled up to this because of the precedent that he invoked. He was talking about it might be permissible to go with the lesser evil of avoiding pregnancy, which is what he said. But then he cited Paul VI's condoning or allowing the use of artificial contraception for nuns that were at threat of being raped in Africa during that period of time. And I mean, that to me is kind of sidling up to the idea that artificial contraception might be a prudential choice. Did you get that sense from what you read in the transcript?
I did. Now, the one thing I think we should be very clear about is the Pope was not just asked about birth control. He was asked about abortion
too,
and birth control. And he was 100% crystal clear that abortion is off the table. He called it a horrendous crime, the taking of an innocent life. And I doubt that's going to get the same play in terms of media coverage. But this was an extraordinarily strong anti-abortion statement from Pope Francis. Now, beyond that, when it came to birth control, you're quite right. He cited the precedent of Paul VI, who in the early 1960s in the Belgian Congo approved the use of contraception, artificial contraception, by Catholic nuns because they were living in an environment that was just rife with sexual violence, and this was an effort to prevent pregnancy in the case of rape. And the Pope said that might be a precedent that would be applicable to the situation with Zika. So he did not make a direct statement that he was going to approve the use of birth control to prevent the transmission of the Zika virus. But at the same time, I agree with you, he clearly left the door open to that. And in my opinion, that is actually far more consequential than anything he said about Donald Trump, because as I say, a pope is not in charge of American politics. A pope is in charge of moral teaching in the Catholic Church.
Yeah, and what I find interesting, because there's another precedent, too, that Pope Francis did not mention, which was in Bosnia in 1993, under similar circumstances, there was an allowance that was more broadly applied to all women in Bosnia because of a rape epidemic there as well. And at the time, the Church explained, look, this is a measure of self-defense. When we talk about contraception, we're talking about it in terms of a consensual act. This is not a consensual act.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the issue in contraception now, Ed, I'm sorry, has always been the question of intent.
Right.
Okay. What the church says, you may not use artificial contraception to prevent the transmission of new life, because the Catholic teaching about marriage is that it must always be open to new life. But, the question arises, what about situations in which the intent is not to prevent the transmission of life, but to prevent the infliction of a harm, whether that harm is an unwanted pregnancy, as in the case of the Congo and Bosnia, or as in the case of Latin America with the Zika virus, infection with a deadly disease. And there, the church has always taken a somewhat more flexible position. And so this is not a novelty from the Pope exactly, but I think it is the first time anyone in authority, and of course in the Catholic Church, you can't get more authoritative than the Pope.
Right.
It's the first time anyone in authority has said that in this specific case, that precedent might apply.
I had a conversation with a wonderful pastor I had, and this is when I was single, like 30-something years ago. It was a group discussion in which somebody brought up the use of artificial contraception, and the pastor said, well, are we talking about in marriage, or are we talking about outside of marriage? And they said, well, outside of marriage. And they said, the thing about artificial contraception outside of marriage is that's not really the issue. Artificial contraception isn't really the issue then. The issue is extramarital sex. The issue in Bosnia and in Africa was forcible rape, which is obviously outside of marriage. What I found interesting about this is that, you don't have that here. This isn't about forcible rape or about dealing with extramarital relations. I think this statement kind of assumes that we're talking about intermarital relations.
Well, sure. The closer analogy here would be what the Vatican has always said when the question is posed about Africa and HIV. And then the question is, if you have a married couple where one partner is HIV positive and the other is not, is it morally permissible for that couple to use contraception not to prevent the transmission of new life, but to prevent the other partner from becoming infected? And the Vatican has always said that is an open question, which in effect is what Francis said today about the Zika virus. So it's not really in advance. It is simply the first time the Pope has said this specifically in connection to this Latin American epidemic.
But it is an interesting, it is an interesting statement, and it does at least hold the possibility that there may be at least some adjustments to Pope Francis's teaching on, or the Catholic Church's teaching, I should say, on the use of artificial contraception.
Well, honestly, what I actually think this means is that it's sort of a backhanded way of giving permission to pastors in the trenches. When they have married couples who are coming to them and saying, hey, we're really worried about getting infected from this virus. Maybe one of us is already infected. What do we do? It's a way of telling them that if in that specific pastoral situation, a confessor says to them, look, this is one of those cases in which the church is not pronounced definitively and you have to make your own decisions, that they're okay with doing that. That's what I actually think this is about.
And, to be honest with you, I know that that pastors have done that actually for quite some time. I mean, going back a long time, talking about the fact that to some extent, depending on what your circumstances are, this might be a prudential decision, but it's really between you and the Lord, basically. And so it wouldn't be the first time I've heard that. It's interesting though that Pope Francis sort of offered that up so clearly in this particular case, and I'm also sort of glad that you found it to be a remarkable statement as well, more remarkable than the Donald Trump stuff.
Well, I don't know about remarkable, but certainly more consequential.
Yes.
Because, for the third time, the Pope's views on American politics are interesting, but he's not going to be voting in November. We are.
Exactly.
But, when it comes to the question of what the Catholic Church does and does not teach, that's the Pope's business.
John, what's coming up next for you? I know I got to let you go because you're a busy man today, and I want to thank you for coming on today, but what do you got coming up next?
Well, actually, on Sunday, I am flying to Australia, where I'm going to be giving a couple of talks. But also, while there, trying to take the temperature about the ferment surrounding Cardinal George Pell, who, as you know, is the Vatican's top financial official, but also somebody under fire in Australia for his record on the sex abuse crisis. and I'm going to be very currently getting ready to be interrogated by a royal commission in Australia. And I'm very interested to see what Australian opinion is about the controversy surrounding Phil.
So we're going to see something about that on cruxnow.com pretty quickly then, I would imagine.
No doubt.
Thank you very much, John. Appreciate you being with us today. Joining me now is Jeff Dunetz from jeffdunetz.com, out of the chat room, into the show.
Hi, guys.
Great to have you with us, Jeff. You certainly look red today.
Yeah, well, it's tax season, and Lois is a CPA.
I do.
So I'm wearing my IRS shirt. It says, Internal Revenue Service destroying the American dream since 1913.
Well, see, now I kind of thought that maybe you were wearing it in honor of somebody's book coming out called Going Red, but, Going Red, you know that book?
You mean that book that everyone should be pre-ordering at Amazon if they haven't yet?
Or you can go through goingredbook.com
absolutely.
and select the retailer of your choice. I want to be as democratic about this as I possibly can. I'll take anything. All right.
Seriously, though, for those and everybody here in the chat room obviously reads your stuff all the time, and to get it as a global picture of what has to be done for the election, I can't wait.
Well, good. I can't either. But if you're going to CPAC, and Jeff is going to be at CPAC, we've already set up now a book signing with about 50 advanced copies of the book.
Really?
Yeah,
cool.
On Thursday afternoon. So first full day of CPAC will be Thursday afternoon, 4:30. So if you're going to be at CPAC, look for the book signing. So yeah, great.
Absolutely.
All right, Jeff. So you did the work that hardly anybody else did.
Is that everybody's been talking about the political part of it, or some people have been talking about, did he really die of natural causes, which I think is disgusting.
Yeah.
So trying to get the conversation away from that, I decided to take a look at what are the key cases that will change because he's not there.
Yes.
And a lot of cases that are very important to conservatives that were no one knows what the vote would have been with him. But there were probably 5-4 conservative wins, and they probably now are 4-4 ties.
And 4-4 ties are interesting because it leaves the last ruling in place, but does not set a precedent. In other words, Supreme Court can take it up again later.
Right. Or they could just decide to say, we're going to rehear it next year.
Right. Yes. They can do that. Yes.
And in one of the cases, it's really weird because it was 4-4 before he died, because Kagan was the Solicitor General when it originally hit the court. That's the USA versus Texas.
Oh, right. That's true.
No, not the USA versus Texas. The Fisher versus University of Texas.
Yes.
So this is the second time it's going to the court. And so it would have probably been a 4-4 vote, and now will probably be either a 4-3, one way or the other.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting because now you're going to have an odd number of justices ruling on this.
And that one's really weird because you know how sometimes the Supreme Court, when it doesn't want to rule on something, they just punt it back.
Right.
And this is the case. It's an affirmative action case. And they didn't want to rule on affirmative action itself. So when it first came to the court in 2013, they said, well, you know what? You guys didn't do a good job to the appellate court. Look at it again. So they looked at it again, and they ruled in favor of the University of Texas, which was, keeping the affirmative, keeping race as a decision, part of the decision.
Right.
And obviously, Miss Fisher, went to the Supreme Court again. So that's one's going to be weird. Okay.
Yeah.
Because anything with affirmative action, you don't know where it's going to go.
True. Yeah. I mean, the Supreme Court's been talking about doing away with it for, I think, at least 20 years, talking about the fact that at some point the mandate for this type of extra constitutional remedy is going to run out,
Right.
and that they're going to have to step back in and reapply the 14th Amendment more broadly.
Right.
And the last time that they had an opportunity to rule on that, they said, we're almost there, but not quite. We're going to keep it in place for a little while longer. And I'm trying to remember what that case was, but I don't think it was that long ago.
No, it wasn't. But the thing is that do you remember what the decision was? Was it 5-4 or something like that?
I think it was. I think it was one of the narrowly decided cases. Yes.
Well, see, now it's starting off at 4-4. So who knows?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you just don't know. Look, it's not the worst thing in the world to have an even-numbered set of justices on the court and have some things that get punted down the road. It may not be optimal, but it beats some other things.
Well, yeah, also it kind of forces them to negotiate with each other, trying to get the wording that maybe they can get someone to come onto their side.
Right.
Well,
that's part of the process too.
But either way, I'll miss. I will miss Justice Scalia's rulings because he's funny. I mean,
oh yeah, he was a great writer. I loved writing. I loved reading these things. Yeah.
The interesting thing is that I didn't realize this, but even with the cases that have already been heard and voted on, the fact that he won't be there when the ruling is issued, his vote doesn't count. Right.
Exactly. They have to start over, basically.
They have to start over.
Yeah.
And they're actually, there's one case that's one man, one vote. A lot of cases with Texas this year, but apparently, Texas counts, and most states do count everyone when they apportion their legislative districts.
Yes,
including kids, felons, and illegal aliens. I mean, sorry, I said the bad word. Criminally trespassing aliens. And this rule was someone saying, but wait a second, this is taking away the power of my vote. That's Evenwall. And so I don't think they should do that. With Scalia, it might have been a 5-4. Without him, this is going to go back to Texas, at least only Texas, and as a 4-4, and they will be able to continue to count the illegal immigrants and felons, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand counting the felons and the kids. I'm not sure about the criminally trespassing immigrants,
right.
As you put it. That's an interesting case, and you think that was likely to be a 5-4 decision, and now we're going to have to.
I think this one's going straight back to Texas. Yeah,
interesting. All right, so what else?
I can't see any of the liberal judges going against. The illegal aliens.
Sure. Yeah. So what else is coming up then besides those two cases?
Well, one I've been writing about for a couple of times in the last year, the Little Sisters of the Poor.
That's right.
And this one's kind of like Hobby Lobby. It's a religious freedom Obamacare case, but the difference is for those who are religious organizations, they have to sign a piece of paper that says, it's okay for my insurance company to, with their own money, etc., buy contraceptive coverage.
Right. That's correct. Yes. At least that's the way it works. In fact, it may not be phrased that way in the paperwork, but
right.
basically what that is by signing that document, it frees the insurance company up to offer it without charging the people who are running it, and the Little Sisters of the Poor say no, that's actually facilitating.
Right. They're saying by doing that, they're telling them to give them the insurance.
Exactly.
And first of all, what it means long term is if it goes the wrong way, all these organizations that are religious organizations that are helping people won't be able to do it anymore. Because how can the Little Sisters of the Poor go against their faith?
Well, and that's the reason why you don't want government getting too far extended into
Right.
these matters, is because that's when it starts to get into conflict with basic constitutional rights, basic natural rights.
Plus, I mean, come on, look at their name. How can you mess up with the Little Sisters of the Poor?
You know, the thing about this case, and conservatives need to remember this, Gabriel Maller once, I think, wrote it for us at Hot Air, is that it's actually not the best case against the contraception mandate because of the way their insurance is structured, because they're not the ones that actually would be telling the insurance company to go out and do this. They're part of a different structure. And so
but
that
they've
politically,
taken 6 cases and merged it. Little Sisters of the Poor is only one of
is
the
only
6.
one of them, right? So the thing about the Little Sisters, particularly the Little Sisters case, is it's the best political case for conservatives. But legally, there are better cases than the Little Sisters of the Poor because of the way the insurance is structured. So that's something to keep in mind too, when the justices start looking at this, is it might not be 5-4 because of that. Although, like you said, because they've combined it with 5 other cases, now that it's probably going to be a broader ruling on this. And if it's 4-4, it basically gets punted until the next Supreme Court comes along and the challenge comes back.
Right. Except, I think that the fact that they ruled in favor of Hobby Lobby, even though it was 5-4, I think that might be a semi-precedent, because the Supreme Court likes to build upon precedents.
Yes, they do.
Maybe I'm just hopeful because it's the Little Sisters of the Poor and it's the First Amendment. It's faith.
Yep.
Now, here's another one with Texas. Last year or 2 years ago, Texas passed a law that abortion centers had to have the same medical standards as any ambulatory surgical centers, and the abortion doctors had to have rights to work in the hospital. And this was all after the case in Philadelphia with Gosnell.
Right. Yes.
And obviously, the pro-abortion people are not happy about that law. And this too, I think, would have been a 5-4. And there is no way that any of the liberal judges will switch over on this one.
Yeah,
because they're just too pro-abortion. But at least for Texas, it doesn't matter because the lower court ruling was the law's okay. So if it gets punted, the Texas law will be fine.
The Texas law will be fine, but the court won't. The decision by the Supreme Court won't hold any precedential weight for any other states.
Right.
Right. Exactly. Okay. Great.
Then there's the USA versus Texas, which is really the case against Obama's illegal alien executive order.
Yeah, this one's kind of interesting too, because I'm not necessarily sure that this one was going to be a 5-4. In part because it doesn't. It probably would have been a 5-4, but I think 4-4 gets them exactly where they want to go to on this, doesn't it?
Yeah, but really, the ruling that they're trying to get is the lower court didn't rule on the case itself. Okay, the lower court, they're suing because the lower court put a stay on the law.
Right.
They didn't hear the case yet.
I mean, that's the other thing about this thing, is that it's really this is over the stay. It's not over the merits of the case. The Obama administration wants the stay to be lifted, and 4-4 probably won't be enough to lift it.
However, the court has asked questions about Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution. The president's duty is to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. So it seems like they were initially, at least, looking to make it a global decision about executive overreach. Or was Obama faithfully executing the law? And it might be perhaps that based on that, they could flip one or two of the liberal judges.
Possibly.
Because it's not an executive order. It's not about illegal aliens. It's really about separation of powers. And if you remember, wasn't it 7-2 when they did the recess appointment?
Yes, I think it was. It was not a 5-4 decision on the recess appointments.
So they might be able to pull people over because it's executive overreach.
Right. Yeah, possibly. Hey, look, I mean, take a look at the, I can never remember the name of this case, but it's the one with the, I believe it was the Lutheran school and the ministerial exception. That was 9-0 against Obama. That was
right.
5-6 years ago. But it was 9-0. I mean, it was a shutout on the Supreme Court. I mean, those things happen. One of the things that we talked about with Hans von Spakovsky on Tuesday was that there's this perception that most of the Supreme Court cases are 5-4 decisions. Very much not the case.
You're right.
What happens is that the ones that are really contentious usually get pushed off to the end of the term in terms of announcing the decision because they're still negotiating with each other to see if there's any way that they can build consensus.
Well, look at the first Obamacare decision.
Yeah, that was like
that was the case where Roberts flipped a couple of weeks before.
Right. So that's what's happening in those really those really contentious cases. But most of the rest of these things, they go out 9-0, 8-1, 7-2, 6-3. I mean, you just don't hear about it because unless the subject matter is really sexy, it isn't gonna really make a lot of news. SCOTUS blog covers them, of course.
Yes,
but for the rest of us, they're not necessarily. There are usually a lot of very technical issues involved that don't really impact public policy all that much. That don't really impact people's lives broadly.
They're going to do whatever they can not to decide on the public policy issue.
Right.
You know, like for example, this one, they're not going to decide on illegal immigration. They're going to decide, if they decide, it'll be based on constitutional separation of powers. Has nothing to do with granting amnesty.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It will be. They try to find the narrowest grounds possible on which to reach their decision. Very rarely do they go out of their way to make a broad ruling. Now, what was interesting in the immigration case was that they took the vote for the to hear the stay case, and it was to impose to uphold the temporary stay, and they actually took a vote amongst the justices rather than Roberts deciding on his own, because remember, it was Roberts's circuit that where this came through. And rather than just make a decision on his own, he threw it to the court, and it came back a 5-4 decision to uphold the stay until the Supreme Court got a chance to look at it, basically to just make sure that it remained in place while it went through all the way to the Supreme Court, which could mean the whole case, not just the stay part of it, but also on the merits. And that to me was interesting. And of course, now Scalia's gone, so it'll be interesting to see how that one plays out.
Well, it's interesting because you said as narrow as possible. They kind of call it something called, and I just learned this, strict scrutiny.
Well, strict scrutiny actually it's strict scrutiny actually means something a little different than that.
Well, yeah, but it's they look at things. There are three things that they look at when it's the strictest way to look at it, when it's the highest level of ruling, they say. And it's, is there a governmental interest? Is it narrow? And when the lower court, then looking at the ruling, and, is it the least restrictive means to do what they need to do? And,
well, okay, that's like RFRA, right? Because RFRA requires strict scrutiny to be applied, but strict scrutiny isn't about their own decisions.
Right? No, it's the decisions of the lower court.
It's how the law should be viewed. So, for instance, when you're talking about core constitutional rights, for instance, the right to bear arms or the right to free speech, anything that infringes on that has to survive strict scrutiny.
Right.
That isn't necessarily about how the Supreme Court approaches the case at hand.
Right.
It's about what they look at, how the law is supposed to be applied. And
Right.
if a law isn't applied in that manner, then they get rid of it. In those cases. So yeah, it's a slightly different thing, but yeah, they try to stay narrow when they can stay narrow. They can't always do it because sometimes these things are broad issues and they have to issue broad rulings, but they really try not to do it.
Ruling, they try to keep it narrow.
Exactly.
I mean, even the Obamacare ruling where they said, well, it's a tax, and even though no one said it was a tax, but it's a tax, and certainly the government has the right to apply taxes.
I'm still sore about that decision. I'm sorry.
Please tell me.
I'm still sore about that decision, but but yeah. All right, Jeff.
And the last one is a union thing,
yes,
which is also a freedom of speech thing. Because can someone in the public sector be forced to join a union?
Yeah,
and that's a California case, and that one will definitely be a 4-4. There's no way that anybody on the left will kind of move things over.
No, and it shouldn't be. It really shouldn't be, but it probably will be a 4-4. So in that case, though, I think the 4-4 favors the conservatives, right? Because that was a favorable ruling in the lower court, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
Yeah. So 4-4 actually favors the conservatives, but it does not have precedential weight.
Exactly. So it's what it really is you're doubling the work.
Exactly.
Because it's all going to come up again.
Yeah, exactly.
But to me, those are the 6, at least conservative cases where conservatives will be concerned about the outcome.
Well,
pro-life conservatives anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jeff, you did a great job running those things down. You're going to be at CPAC.
I'm going to be at CPAC.
Get a chance to catch up with you there.
Oh, yeah, you'll talk to me before.
Is your daughter going to be at CPAC?
Are you kidding? I need people
there
to come up to me and like they did a couple of years ago. You know that story, right?
I'm trying to remember the story, but I know it, but I'm trying to remember it.
Somebody comes up to me. The first year my daughter was at CPAC, and my daughter and I share a room. She's my daughter.
Yes.
And someone comes up to me and goes, this is a conservative conference. It's really not right for you to a married man to share a room with a woman that's not your wife. I said, my wife encouraged it. She didn't want us to pay for 2 rooms. And I looked at me. I changed her diapers. That's my kid.
It's interesting how people like to inject themselves into
right?
situations that they don't know anything about, right?
Absolutely.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing you there.
Same here, man.
I'm going to do the Mexican food thing again. I'm going to try to get you to eat some guacamole.
Well, we'll do the Mexican thing again, but I don't know about the guac.
All right, Jeff Dunetz from Jeff
Dunetz. You eat guac, Trump will go after you.
Hey, I'm going to eat
Mexican.
I'm going to eat guac no matter what. So there you go. I don't care.
Yeah, well, I'm just going to build the wall.
You're going to build the wall. Like at the Vatican. All right. Jeff Dunetz from JeffDunetz.com. You can find him at YidWithLid on Twitter. Thanks again, Jeff. We will talk to you again soon, sir.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right. We're going to go ahead and wrap things up for today. I want to thank everybody who is in here. We'll be back again on Tuesday. Andrew Malcolm back again with us on Tuesday. We'll talk about South Carolina at that point, and also about the Nevada caucuses, which will be taking place that evening. So Andrew and I will have a lot of things to talk about. We'll get a couple more guests as well. Hopefully we'll have some updates on Dwayne. Make sure he's doing well. Question from the chat room. I know you wanted to keep politics out of this, but is McConnell going to keep his no hearings, no votes pledge? Actually, McConnell has obviously a lot of say in that, but the guy that you really want to be looking at is Grassley, because he's the head of the Judiciary Committee, and if he doesn't schedule any hearings, then McConnell can't schedule a floor vote. So I think the guy you want to be working on is Chuck Grassley. And don't forget, remember that when Grassley was running for re-election, the guy that was running against him was a congressman. I can't remember his name. But he was caught in a moment at a private fundraiser saying, if we elect Chuck Grassley back to the Senate, we might have a farmer in charge of the Judiciary Committee, which is a really bad argument to make when you're from Iowa. And the guy just, yeah. So Grassley is the guy that you got to be looking out for. You got to try to strengthen him up on that. So that's my answer to the question. We'll see what happens. It's very possible that what they say is, hey, nominate somebody. We'll take a look at him. Oh, nope, we don't like him either. That might happen. And what I would also say is take a look at those polls from NBC and CBS this morning, both two different polls showing exactly the same thing, that Americans are split down the middle on this. Virtual tie on this. 45% say the Supreme Court nomination should be made now. 45% say it should be made by the next president. And among independents, it's also split, roughly 45-45, 46-43 in the CBS poll. And so there's certainly, it's not an extreme position to say, hey, look, you've got an outgoing guy here who shouldn't be making lifetime appointments that might last 30 years at this point in time. Let's have an election, see what the mood of the country is, and then the next president will nominate a Supreme Court justice. We'll see how that plays out, but it is not an argument that is outside the mainstream, as these polls very clearly showed. So we'll see how that goes. All right, again, I want to thank everybody for being here with us today. I want to thank Cranky T-Rex at Cranky T-Rex on Twitter. He writes for BuzzPo.com. His personal blog is crankytrex.blogspot.com, and occasionally he dips into hotair.com, and always great to have him there when he does. Also want to thank, let's play a little walking music here. I should tease something out. It's not even book related, but while I'm at it, don't forget GoingRedBook.com, coming out on April 12th. So make sure you pre-order your copy now. There's going to be a big announcement at Hot Air tomorrow. Big announcement. Doesn't have anything to do with comments. Big announcement tomorrow at hotair.com. So stay tuned. Stay tuned. You'll be interested in hearing about this. All right. I want to thank again everybody for being with us. Let's go ahead and play a little of the walking music here. There we go. I knew I could hear this. Up a little high, though. Who else has been in the chat room? Rick Nichols. Don't forget to put your own URLs and your Twitter handles in the chat room. We're all about shameless blog promotion here at the Ed Morrissey Show. Rick Nichols, my Hugh Cruise mate, one of the fabulous troubles. Conservative and liberal hands, Fausta from faustusblog.com, a great Western Hemisphere blog. I read her every single day, so should you. Guelph, Juanito Cabron. Little known fact about Fausta, she actually built the Vatican walls. She built them all. I think it was 59 days, right? She just built them all up. Little known fact about Fausta. Guelph, Juanito Cabron, Caldeath, Mr. Fastbucks, another one of the fabulous tribbles. Opachanga, T-Rand, Via Paso at the Ancestral Morrissey Manse. Hi, Mom. And the first mate behind me, keeping me on the straight and narrow. All right, folks, don't forget, we'll be back on Tuesday, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. Central, 1 on the left coast. Don't miss a minute of the Ed Morrissey Show. We'll see you later.